It's now 3:20. I'd like to reconvene this meeting of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. At this time, we are continuing on with our session to receive information on outreach efforts. I would like to update everyone on the agenda. We have actually heard from the majority of our groups that had registered to present to us today. We have had a couple of cancellations, and we do have one individual who we're not totally sure if they're going to be here. They were on a flight cross-country, and we have not heard anything from them in quite a long time. So what we're going to do right now is transition to opening it up for public comment, and then we can assess after that whether this individual will be joining us. So at this time, I'd like to just get a show of hands how many interested members of the public we have who'd like to speak. Got about 1, 2. Excellent. So I'd ask you to keep your public comment to no more than 5 minutes, and we'll start over here. If you could approach the desk, have a seat at the mic.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jim Wright again. Last evening I gave you 4 criteria that you might use in collecting information about the various communities of interest. I'd like to add one. What I told you was you need a label, a name for it, you need boundaries, you need to know why it's a community of interest, and then some information about who's proposing it. You also need to know the density of that area that's defined by the boundaries, because that's interesting for comparing things. Looking at the testimony that's been presented today, I've come up with some ideas that might help you to understand how to handle things. The COI and neighborhood information that you receive is extremely important. You're interested in areas that are as compact as possible. If they're spread all over the place, and this brings up the density issue, then they don't become communities of interest if there's 3% in density. You're probably not interested in statewide maps, other people's statewide maps. You're going to be creating your own statewide map. And even whole districts might not be of much interest to you unless they're really defining a community of interest, a neighborhood. And you may find a few of those. You might ask organizations to bring their information and testify as early as possible in the process, because they will probably bring you a large volume of information that you need to wade through, whereas individuals bringing you information are probably interested in a very narrow area. And start your input meetings sooner, not later, please. There's a lot of information I'm hearing that people have today that they want to bring forward to you, and the sooner you get it, the sooner you start to encode it, the sooner you start to collect it, the better off you're going to be. And as far as the suggestion from a couple of the speakers about doing the first map in June instead of May, the sooner you get your first cut before the people, the more cycles you're going to be able to do to refine it and get a better map. So keep the date in May. I'll speak to that. May 24th, I think it was. Sounds like a good date to me. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to address the Commission? Please come forward.
Hi, folks. Stephen Ochoa, MALDEF. Just because there were a few questions, I guess, during the hearing after I spoke about various things, and I just wanted to. So I remember Commissioner DiGio.
It's okay. DiGiulio, kind of
Leo,
like DiGiorno, like the pizza. DiGiorno, DiGiulio.
If it makes you feel any better, my last name is often misspelled.
Okay, that's it. No, I'm used to
mispronounced. you had asked, what if we put out idea maps before a official draft map, or multiple ideas out there? I would suggest no. The minute you put out any type of map, even however reasoned or how logical or it's just an idea, we're not wedded to it, people go crazy. That is, everyone wants to see the map. Everyone wants to see a map, any map. And then the minute you give them a map, they're going to go crazy. And a slight example, in 2002, I had to participate in the Los Angeles Unified School District Commission process. Very first meeting, all I did was come with a map of the existing lines and the current populations at the time. I walked in and I just handed it to the commissioners, trying to be helpful, because I know at that point they were still looking for staff. And immediately, Maldef's come in with a map. Maldef's got a map. This is your map. So if you put out multiple, what you need to do first is create kind of like the first superstructure, perhaps a few ideas of alternatives within an existing clearly defined structure, like of two regions, so you know how they affect the potential changes later in the state. Because you can't draw a single district in a vacuum. You don't, once you kind of drop, it's like dropping a pebble in a pool, in a pond. You see there's ripple effects. So you do need to you have a reasoned superstructure, and then you may have to be able to do alternatives within that. But you also don't want to do that early either, because then all people are going to focus on is look at everything that's out there. It might be a little too much. You have to be a little more in control of that particular process. You might offer alternatives within your superstructure of a map, but so I would suggest no, and I still suggest setting a clear deadline for community members. Get your stuff in by, say, May 31st, and then our maps will come out on June 10th. You've given us plenty of notice. This is like your most efficient deadline to get your info in. You can certainly turn in information after, but it won't be as influential. But that was so that in that regard. Other comment though, I do want to. I guess you are looking for staffing. I do want to just kind of point out you do need to get your technical assistant sooner rather than later. Assuming there's no federal government shutdown, census data is probably coming out in about 2 weeks now, and then even after that, it's going to take another month to add all the relevant election data you need to the new PL data, which you're going to need to at some point run all the racially polarized voting, et cetera, you need for voting rights compliance. Sooner rather than later, of course, focusing on trying to find someone with relevant skills, impartial. But, you're kind of hitting that danger point, because you need someone at least on staff who is as familiar as possible with at least the software, how to use data, how to instruct you if this is something new to you as individuals, so you can best participate in the process and complete your appointed duties as a commissioner and give proper input. I think that's it for now, but if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. Appreciate it. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to comment?
Hi, good afternoon. Astrid Garcia with Naleo Educational Fund, and I do love both ways my name is pronounced. I want to start by also commenting on the question of mapping. I do believe that it's important to create the continued open environment that the transparent approach the Commission has adopted continue. And we do feel that starting off with a draft map, even a partial draft map or an idea map, may set a different tone for the community members. They may assume that some commissioners may be holding to some of these ideas, and I think as much as possible, it would be great for the Commission to really come to the community and say, we don't have preconceived ideas, we're here to listen to yours. And I think starting with no map for your input meetings sets that tone. if you do want to have a point for the community members to react to, which I heard Commissioner Giulio say, perhaps providing maps with demographic data. So that gives an idea of how the state's population has changed. That might be an idea if you do want some kind of visual for the community to react to. And that's just, I'm not a mapper, I'm not a data geek, and I'm not a techie. That's just one idea that may be helpful. So I do defer to the experts in that area. And then finally, I also want to just comment on the community maps. You've heard our presentations today. You have seen in detail what our outreach efforts are, and know that the work that we're doing is not on behalf of our organizations. It is on behalf of the community members. So NALEO Educational Fund, for example, we are not drawing a map. We will be participating in the public process, and part of that we're working closely with APAC, we're working closely with MALDEF, and through our community workshops we're going to be reaching over 300 individuals in the next month and a half, hopefully more. And so know that the maps are not NALEO Educational Fund maps. They're not going to be MALDEF or APAC maps. These are maps that are generated through community input, and we're hoping to just contribute to the dialogue that you all will have as commissioners as you decide the lines for California's future. And as a final comment, I just really want to thank you all for your attention to this process. I've seen how thoughtful you have been as I've watched the meetings via the website, and today as I sit here with you all day long. I truly appreciate you taking your Saturdays and spending it for this process. Thank you so much for your service to our state.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment? Please come forward.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Eugene Lee at the Asian Pacific American Legal Center. And I wanted to echo the comments made by Ms. Garcia and also Ms. Linick earlier this morning about starting with a blank slate in hearings. Just one quick addition or one additional comment on this is that a lot of our groups are working to increase participation among groups or communities that historically have been underengaged in the process. And I guess my fear with an idea map being released early on is that community members who have been historically underengaged may feel a little bit stifled or fearful of questioning what seems to be a government-sanctioned document. So if the commission produces an idea map, goes into hearings and soliciting input on it, then community members may feel reluctant to speak up if their ideas seem contrary to what the commission has been thinking about. So I think it's a much better process if the commission solicits input without any sort of anchoring point being used. On the point of, I guess, trying to go through many drafts of maps, I think that's a nice notion, but we're constrained by the 14-day posting requirement for every map. So there's a limit to how many maps the commission can do. What I provided earlier, the proposed calendar, is an attempt to allow the commission to produce 2 draft maps, with still the first draft being released in June rather than May. And so the calendar attempts to show how the timing can still work, how the commission can still go about taking input on 2 draft maps, but with the first map being released at a later date than May 25th. So just to get into specifics really quickly, as Mr. Ochoa mentioned, there would be a May 31st deadline by which community organizations would have to submit maps, 9 days for the commission to deliberate and settle upon a first draft map, with that first draft map being released on June 10th, hearings on that first draft map, and then a second draft map being released on July 15th. And in the calendar that I provided to you, it provides for a number of hearings across the regions on 2 draft maps. And again, it's an attempt to show you how we think it could work. And then the last point I want to make is, I made this point earlier this morning, which is once the Commission does produce a draft map, it's basically starting down a certain path, and it's going to be difficult to make significant changes to that draft map. So in my opinion, it's going to be better for the Commission to get all of the input in the front door right away, make sure it considers everything out there before it produces the first draft map. Once the first draft map is put out there, and if community members provide input after that, it's much more difficult for that input to get really considered by the Commission, given that it's difficult to put in substantive changes or significant changes after the first draft map is released. So those are the points I wanted to make, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Are there other members of the public who would like to provide comment? Please come forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Chauvin. I am here on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County. I'm actually one of the observers that Trudy Schaefer described. I apologize for my attire. I had no intention of speaking today, but during the discussion, I was overcome and I couldn't help myself. Even worse than a technical geek, I'm a legal geek, and I have in the past worked on legal issues regarding Bagley-Keene. And the one thing that struck me was that during some of the discussion was that the technology now is so sophisticated, and you're talking about real-time interactive map drawing, and I would just offer that you might think about considering that could be considered a form of communication. And so whether I would suggest you think about whether you need to have an explicit policy about members going online and using live interactive mapping, particularly one that has the capability of being not having your identity disclosed. And again, it's a perception thing. So.
Thank you, Ms. Chauvin. Appreciated. Are there other members of the public who would like to come forward and comment?
I also couldn't help myself. People were sitting around talking about maps and data, and that's what we do. So when I walked in, I unfortunately walked in a little late, and I picked up the calendar that was in the front table out there, and I said, thank God they had decided to move back the publication of the first draft map back a couple of weeks. I come to find out that it's actually not an official commission document, but a proposal. But I do think the proposal is very sound, and for 2 reasons. And reasons that I'm sure you all are very familiar with. We've actually, beyond engaging with folks that you see in the room and people who are deeply sort of committed and have been preparing for this process, we've been meeting with others that have not had the opportunity to prepare or to be as familiar. And I'd have to say I personally have been a little bit dismayed by the state of the field being as far back as it is. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, you know, there's some fatigue after the census about doing this kind of work or getting further involved in this kind of work. I also believe that funding streams to do this kind of work have been late in coming, and so organizations have not really been able to kind of get into this as much. And so any delay or pushback of a draft map would be, I think, very helpful. The second point I'd like to make is, and again, you all know this, is that a draft map is not a single plan. It's actually a culmination of about 1,000 decisions, or many, many decisions. And it may have a chilling effect of people trying to interpret those decisions as seeing a direction that the commission may be going in, though you may have no intention of transmitting that kind of interpretation, but people will look at that as sort of when Wikipedia or WikiLeaks put out some documents, people were scouring through every single thing that they could and making all sorts of sort of theories about it, and people will do the same with these maps. Every line, every nook, every cranny, people will see it as a decision being made, and it may have a chilling effect of engagement. So I would also very much support this idea of delaying the first map.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment? Then I would like to ask our facilitation team, do we have any word from Mr. Lee?
We do not have any word from Mr. Lee, and I would say at this point, if we haven't heard him being off the plane at the airport, I don't think he's going to be able to make it. He was unclear what would happen.
Okay, thank you. So then what I'd like to say, a few remarks in closing. We will not be needing to meet on Sunday. I think that's evident at this point in time. What we are working on is making sure that the presentations from today, both from the presenters who were able to join us in person, and then we had 3 presenters who had registered from CAUSE, from the Contra Costa Redistricting Task Force, and from the Chinese American Voters Education Committee. We will also be inviting them to submit their PowerPoints. I think we already have some of their PowerPoints, and that we anticipate those being available at both the wedrawthelines.ca.gov website and the redistrictingca.org websites. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I was also going to add for the presenters, their request that they send their PowerPoint to you all, and I wanted to let them know that anyone that gave me anything today I have, and so unless you hear from us, we'll send that along to the commission and get it posted for you. So.
Excellent. So we're coming to the end of our meeting, and it has been a pleasure serving as your chair over today and the last couple of days, long days of business here in Sacramento. I did want to note that based on our rotating leadership structure, that for our upcoming meeting, our new chair will be Commissioner Filkins-Weber, and her vice chair will be Commissioner Blanco. And that we anticipate our next meeting dates will be as follows. On March 15th, that we would be having our Legal Advisory Committee that would be meeting here in Sacramento. Of course, agendas will be forthcoming within the next few days on these meetings. And then that we would be meeting as a full commission from the 17th through the 19th here in Sacramento. 17th through the 20th in Sacramento, potentially. And then there's a possibility we may be meeting that following week, but we will be back in Sacramento on the 15th and then the 17th through that weekend.
Just one point of clarification, the 17th is likely advisory committee and not general session.
In accordance with how we've been posting our agendas, that first day of our full long session when we meet here on the 17th would be an advisory committee day. So we would not be meeting the full commission together, but we would have our schedule of the 5 advisory committees that we have would be meeting here in the Capitol building. So with that, again, we'd like to, I'm sorry, Ms. Blanco?
Yes, I think it'd be helpful for the public to know that the Legal Advisory Committee of the 15th will be a meeting to specifically to go over the applications we hope to have received the day before for our voting rights attorney position.
Right. And again, just for the public, because we will formally notice that meeting.
No, I know.
But in addition to that, for the public, so the public sort of knows what we've been discussing regarding timelines. For those who didn't listen to earlier meetings, there is a timeline by which the Voting Rights Act request for information will be released early next week, and there will be a deadline of the 14th of March, and we're hoping to have, by the 15th, be able to do the hearing, not the hearing, to have the Legal Advisory Committee meet to review those applications.
That's what I was just about to say. And that meeting will actually be a public meeting where we will go through the stack of whatever we have received to do a first cut of those applications. So in keeping with with our commitment to transparency and public input, that is a public meeting, in fact, when we will be doing the first cut of our voting rights attorney applications.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. So I think we'd say that this session has been a great success. Of course, it's been the first time we've done this type of an event, and in our goal of trying to educate ourselves as a commission about what resources were already out there across the state of California in terms of education and outreach, we wish that it had come sooner in the process, but we're grateful that we have it at this point and moving forward. So thank you for traveling here. Thank you for your time. I think we've identified some places where there are existing synergies that we can build upon together and where there are some gaps that we as a commission may need to address moving forward. We do want to express a very deep thanks to the legislature for hosting us here in this facility. It's been an excellent space for us and also has allowed us access to other resources that we've needed in Sacramento. And of course to the governor's office for having accommodated our very tight schedule to meet with us and hopefully to intervene in our behalf on some of the obstacles that we're facing in terms of our timelines and our infrastructure. So with that, this meeting is adjourned, and it is... No, Mr. Wilcox will not be doing accomplishments today, but thank you. We are now adjourned.